Okay, so we talked about PvP combat. That's like a combat skill that the combat skill can always be used to gain victory points in some way. Running pure to the 13 spiders can always be used to gain crypto, or running it to the refinery, one of the two. And those involve the influence skill. We're missing one for the tech skill, as far as like an engine sort of generate VP over the course of the game. The tech skill needs something like that. But I think maybe putting it in context might help things a little bit. So what is victory points? We talked about the possibility of it being like notoriety, but what does that mean in terms of the story? And it's like, well, okay, maybe there's like some controlling entity that used to be in that part of the city and it's gone now. Okay, not 13 spiders, but something else, something like, not as subversive as 13 spiders, something that's more obvious and apparent, like corporate or dregs or biotechs or bionetics. And so this power vacuum happens, and one of the three factions of our game is the one that's trying to become the new controlling faction or leader. Whoever the leader is for that player would be the controlling person of that faction. This could open up for us not just a single player winning, but like if we had 6 players, we have 2 players per faction, right? Now you have teams. Yeah. Because you could have a faction win and a player win, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So if David and I were teamed up on one faction, only one of us has to win for the faction to win. So then we can strategize with each other to kind of like, even if he doesn't gain enough VP to win, he just needs to make sure that I do so that our faction wins.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it could be like David is combat oriented and I'm just drug running, and David's going to go steal VP from other players, so that I can stay ahead,
right?
Or something like that. Or there's more possibilities for us to tweak the mechanics for team play to kind of make it more interesting, as far as like gaining VP or something like that. But anyway, it just opens up that possibility.
Is there a mechanic in there where you would end up with like, maybe 2 different dregs going against each other?
See, that's where I think, if you're in the same faction, then you wouldn't be able to engage in PvP. It doesn't seem like.
Because doesn't that end up taking away something from there? That makes it, is that making it a little bit too competitive or not?
I think it makes it irrelevant because if David and I are on the same faction and then we get into an altercation, the victory points is just shifting from one to the other. And that could be a strategy where, we weigh the odds toward one person every time. David steals all my VP, gets in the lead, and our faction wins.
Well, and that's what I was about to say. Yeah. Is that a mechanic you want to introduce?
So we only have 3 factions. We have individual players. If it's either a 2 to 3 player game where each has to pick a different faction. There's plenty of games that do that where they force you to pick different factions.
Correct. Yeah.
Like in, what is it? Star Wars Risk, the Clone Wars edition.
Yeah.
2 players can be Federation, players can be Republic, and can't fight Republic. But as long as one Republic player wins, then the Republic won. So it wouldn't make sense for people within the same faction to PvP each other, but it does make sense for them to try and strategize and make sure that one of them wins.
But we don't want somebody just sandbagging VP and handing it to the other to give them
which is what we can't. That's a mechanic that we have to avoid, is that if we're on the same faction, you can't give me VP, but you can go steal VP from other players, because that effectively slows down the other players, even though that is also ranking you up. As long as one of us wins, we both win, and that's the strategy. So I think it can work. I think we just have to make sure that we specify how team play works.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
And that if you have 4 players, then you have to have 2 players on one faction, 2 players on another faction. You can't do 2 people, 1 person, 1 person, and then
so the only instance where you're going to have an odd man out is 5 players.
Right. Which in the case of games like Risk, what they do is they give you control of both armies, and you effectively take 2 turns. I've seen, so like if you have a 3-player game in Star Wars Risk, people will be a team, and then I would play the other 2 armies.
Does that lead to an unfair advantage? Well, the reason
I've lost plenty of times doing that.
Well, the reason I ask that is, how does the turn base go?
Well, it is 1 person at a time, and turn is a deck builder. So you're going to play cards and take actions according to what you can do for that turn, and then your turn passes. So if I were the odd man out, I would have 2 ships at my command, 2 leaders, 2 different two different decks. So I would be commanding two different decks, and I would have to keep them separate. I would have to treat myself as two players, just like the Risk does. In Risk, you can't have, for blue and yellow, my blue guys can't go into the yellow territories. That's not, like, I can't intermix them, and I can't intermix my turn. I have to take one complete turn, and then I have to take another complete turn, and it makes it balanced for the factions. It seems unbalanced because it's one guy doing it, but it's really no different than if there was a person sitting next to me also playing.
I wouldn't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't either.
Well, that's what I was asking. So to be clear, like if you had a 5-player game and you have, let's say, one monochrome player goes, does the second monochrome player go right immediately afterward, or is that variant depending on how the order is situated? Like who actually goes first? And
okay. You mean like how is it? How does it go around the table as far as like how the factions get a turn?
Because a fifth player in that respect ends up with in my opinion, a bigger advantage
because they take two turns for the same faction.
It's a longer set of term. It's a longer set of movement. It's a longer set of strategy. That's
only if the turns are alternating or not. So if the turns were not alternating, if it was monocron, dregs, bionetics, then it wouldn't matter.
Right.
Depends on the situation.
Yeah. But if it was a situation where it staggers, then it would be Chron bionetics dregs, monocron bionetics dregs, and whoever that odd man out is that's playing dregs would have to take his turn at the appropriate time.
Okay.
And he would have a little bit more to keep track of just because he's playing two people, essentially.
Right.
So it depends on
So that boils down to house rules.
Okay.
It could be, or we could define it. The Game of Thrones game has an interesting way of dealing with this. They have an initiative, basically.
Okay.
And so the first turn or priority of the turn can change every time.
Okay.
There's also games that rotate the priority. So in the first round, you could say, "Oh, monocron goes first," and every faction gets a sequence of turns, and then a new round begins where the first player is Bionetics. Bionetics gets priority this round, and then Dregs gets priority the next round. Like there's a sort where we rotate the leader player around the table, same thing, and there's so you can try to get rid of first player advantage that way as well.
That was my next question, was just if there was any indication that first player advantage would consistently do that, because I always think that like if there's a situation where you have one faction that always goes first, most people will want to play that, So okay.
Yeah. In Game of Thrones, they use what's called plot cards, and on the plot card, each player plays one secretly. And then we all flip over our plot cards, and a plot card will have an initiative on it, and that determines the order of the players for the round. And the higher the initiative, the worse the other attributes of the card. Better the attributes of the card, the worse the initiative.
Oh, jeez, wow.
So they balance it with like, if you want to do some badass stuff, you're going to go last.
Right.
And potentially get messed up.
That's pretty cool, actually.
So it's a really interesting way of doing it. I think once we actually play the Game of Thrones game, we might get some ideas on how to deal with player order. But I think for now, the idea of having teams and single players is a really interesting way to go about it. Yeah. And I think we can stick to that. So theme, if you're trying to be the controlling action of the city, and on the original steampunk map, we had the three factions basically owning territory.
Right.
Played these games where you can, like in Risk or some other games where territory control is part of the game, right? So what if instead of picking specific locations to always be associated with a specific faction, what if we gave players faction tokens and they could use their influence skill to claim location?
Okay.
And then other players can use their influence skill to come in and take over those areas. And basically it's like rivaling mafias, where it's like, you're going to pay me protection money now, and we're booting these other guys out. You pay me now, kind of thing. And we could even go as far as these influence tokens. Like if you have a defensive player, you put more than one token on a single location, and now it's harder to break through and change the faction. So I can use my influence skill to shore up my location to prevent you from taking them.
So essentially, it's a version of King of the Hill.
Kind of.
Okay.
And it's almost like Risk as well, because the more guys that I have on my country or location, the harder you have to work to get rid of all my guys before you can put a guy there.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that your player has to be there and basically sit there in order to stack tokens on the space. You can't just be across the map and say, okay, I want to put one of my tokens on that space.
Yeah. You'd have to physically be on a space that you want to try and convert, right? And then we would have to have some kind of influence check that happens. And it could be like the PvP thing, but with influence instead of combat. And instead of losing or gaining VP, you're losing and gaining territory. So if I have 3 tokens on a location, you would have to win in a territory dispute with me 3 times before you get to put.
So are we doing this? I know I'm going back and forth and the rules are getting jumbled in my head. So in the original game, it was turn-based and you could go to a location and you could fly was one action and then you could work or trade. So if you were already on the location, could you do influence twice and remove 2 tokens from that location, or remove 1 and add your own?
That's a possibility. I think we'd have to look at the balancing of how much resource that's going to take, because you only get 1 turn. You only get 5 cards in your hand. Spend all your cards trying to beat me once, you're not going to have any cards left to go again. In fact, if I remember right, in the new version of the steampunk, the only let's see, what was. Hang on, I'll pull it up.
That's what I couldn't remember. It's where did we fall on the deck builder version?
Okay, so the actions phase of the steampunk, you had trade, fly, and work.
Right.
Trade was you could pay for newly acquired cards, and you could do this as much as you want, and that is considered 1 time of doing that action. Flying, you could do once a turn.
You couldn't do it twice anymore?
Because you could either move 1 location as slow ahead and draw navigation card, or you can move a number of locations up to your airship speed and draw a navigation card every time. So you would choose the speed that you're traveling and then move that number of locations. We're probably going to borrow that for Cyberpunk, where they can move 1 space or they can move up to their speed, and that's how they choose their fly action. And then the work action, you may do one of the following once a turn: take a job and complete a skill challenge. So work is also limited, but it's limited in the number of times you can do it. So each one has its own kind of limitation. Trade is limited by how much money you've got in your hand. Fly is limited by your choice of speed, and work is limited by number of times you can do it. So in the original game, work completing a skill challenge can only be done once. So if we stick to that, then that means using influence to try and take over a territory, you can only do once in a turn, and then you got to go do something else. Depending on how we hash out the way that influence and territories work and how my defenses work, because it might be, I have an idea. See if you buy this. Say I've got a territory that has 1 token and a territory that has 3 tokens. You go after the one that has 3 because you really want that one. I'm not there. I'm not on the space like we would in combat. Right. So the number of tokens that's sitting there is my influence bonus for defending it.
Okay, so it's not number of turns you have to sit there and whittle away. It's plus plus X tokens.
Right. So maybe option 1, you have to win by a certain amount to take out extra tokens.
Okay.
So not just win, but you have to exceed. So
right.
So if we tie in our game, in our original game, if we tie, the defender wins. Defender wins ties.
So you get nothing.
So you have to have a +1 on me to win. That would take away 1 token. If you had a +2 on me when you win, you take 2 tokens. You have a +3 on me when you win, you get to take 3 tokens away. So you have to beat me by more and more in order to take away extra tokens.
So then my question is what's the check to add tokens to yourself?
So, right. That's a good idea. That's a good question. So if I want to add more tokens to my own, the option that comes to mind is just once a turn, a faction, a location that you're sitting on, you can add 1 influence token to.
Right, but you have to be sitting on it or travel through it.
Yeah, or we could make it like roll anything but a 1 to add another, and that just represents you rubbing elbows and being present and just
showing your face.
Showing your influence over that area. Yeah. So we could say that it is still a skill check. You still have to use influence. Roll anything that's not a 1. And I think we made it where all the captains have. Oh shit!
That's a good place to stop. We can pick this up.
We will figure out how the tech skill comes involved next time.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
Yep.